Good. Welcome to Citizen Church. If you're joining us from off island, thank you so much for coming to church on your vacation. We love that. I love Christmas. I love Christmas parties. So we'll start with a Christmas party story. So this group of friends here on the picture is affectionately known by Sarah and I as the Fab Four. We largely raised our kids together. We were living in Minnesota. One of those guys is also named Craig, and he invited me to his holiday party. It's actually his work party, but he decided to invite some friends, and being kind of a smart aleck, I said, I'll come to your holiday party, but only if I can come to a Christmas party. So to drive the point home, we were going to his house, but we stopped at church. And we went into the storage compartment and got all the stuff out of the nativity box. And we dressed up as the characters from the nativity and showed up at his work party. It was his holiday party, and his crazy 6 friends show up dressed as the wise men, Mary and Joseph, and the Magi, which went over well, and then we continued to do it. But it's a good example of right there, like the tension in Christmas. Some of that gray area, like, is it a holiday party? Is it a Christmas party? Do we even say Merry Christmas? Like, that's one of the tensions we're going to talk about this morning, that Christmas is certainly a time of joy, a time of family, it's a time of giving, unless you're in financial straits or your family isn't very functional. But that's not how we like to think about Christmas, is it? We like to think about Christmas as this ideal setting around the fire and everything's great, maybe kind of like this picture. So the cute family in the pajamas, and yes, you'll recognize the cute family as my family. So there we are with baby Sam here, our newest grandson. So we love baby Sam. So you'd look at that picture and say, oh, isn't that great? 3 generations, all in matching jammies, a number of great marriages, everything's perfect, right? Well, yeah, but you see 3 other little boys there, a set of twins that are 2, and a 5-year-old, and they're a lot. And they're a lot as far as bringing germs, which is why Pastora wasn't here last week, and a lot to clean up after, and Sam, a newborn, had to be separated. So, yeah, the picture looks great, but the reality behind the picture was not as great. But that's a Christmas story, right? That's part of the Christmas season, this idea of like the good and the bad. Our country doesn't like to do this well, this idea of both. Like that picture can be both a joy and very fun, but also frustrating at the same time. We like to think things have to be one or the other. So you find this in culture, especially today, you're either a Democrat or a Republican. You're either left or right, liberal or conservative, whatever it might be. You're either pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. And those topics just divide us so much. Like there's so much stress in those topics of like, well, what if I'm both? Like I want to be both a Democrat and a Republican because there's parts of both that I like and parts of both that I don't like so much. And I think the Christmas story actually has some interesting areas we could examine in the same thing. But we don't typically do that, do we? We normally talk about Christmas as this perfect, idyllic place of everything was just right, even at that first Christmas. And there's some threads in this story that we'll pull on today that aren't maybe quite like that. So I titled my sermon, The Christmas Story and. And the and is this idea of, well, there's more to the Christmas story. If you really start to examine some of the threads that we could pull on in the Christmas story, there's a lot there. And a lot there that maybe isn't as we see it. So we'll start with the players. So let's pull on that thread a little bit in this story. So the most famous player, probably after Jesus, is Jesus' mother, Mary. So we all know Mary, and we all know about the virgin birth. We find it in Matthew. We could read right here, Matthew 1:18. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. But before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Most of us are very familiar with this story, right? Oh, like Mary, the virgin birth. But I think we're familiar with it. We're so familiar with it, it becomes positive, or we view it not really as we should. So my challenge for you this morning is like, just step back a minute and imagine that Mary was your daughter. So if you're the father or mother of Mary, maybe imagine this scene. You're sitting at dinner and Mary is acting odd. Like you keep asking Mary, like, is everything okay? Like, yeah, it's fine. And then as a parent, you get that question at the end of dinner that you never like, which is, hey, can we sit down and talk? And you're like, yeah, this isn't going well. And then Mary proceeds to tell you that she's pregnant. And you're like, okay, this is a big problem. Because yes, Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but in that time in history, there was 1 year before they were actually married. So that we would call it engaged, they called it betrothed. It was a contract. It started as in a ceremony, but it was a year before the husband and wife came together. So Mary's parents, I guarantee, were in shock, were in anger, were frustrated with Mary. And Mary's like, wait a minute. You don't know the rest of the story. This is from God. I got a visit from an angel, and this is planned. This is the baby of the Holy Spirit. Okay, parents. Like you're like, really? Really, Mary? Yeah, that doesn't seem to jive. We don't know Mary's parents' name in the story, but we do have evidence of what happened next from kind of circumstances, which is Mary's parents said, there's the door. Like they were done. Like this is not this joyous Mary, the mother of Jesus situation. This is unwanted pregnancy, shame to my family. We're done. Like you're done. We're done. We're never going to talk anymore. And Mary was out the door. We don't really think of Mary that way as we do, as we think about, oh, this like virgin birth and bringing the Lord in, which is awesome. And that's a great part of the story. But we rob some of the power of the Christmas story if we take away the other side, the tension, the gray of that story that we live in every day. As we started, we were talking about even, do we say Merry Christmas? Do we call it a Christmas party? We find this in the first player in Mary. There was a lot of tension there, especially I can relate as a father. Like, this is my daughter. Like, I love her more than my life. But society says, unwanted pregnancy, I have to be the one that says, you're out. You're out of the family. So clearly some gray there already in the Christmas story that maybe we don't think about. And then we jump to the next player in the scene, just the next verse, which is Joseph. Thank you, Pastor Apoc, who knows his Bible well. So we find that in 119. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace. He had a mind to divorce her quietly. So Joseph would have really had three options here. Joseph knew he wasn't the other half of the thing that had the pregnancy come about. So he knew it was an adultery situation. Like Mary, had an affair. So the law in this time was pretty harsh. We know what the law was in this time, which was Mary could be stoned. So we don't find that in the Bible. Interestingly, it does say he was a righteous man, but he wasn't following the law. So we see some sympathy there. That's great. He wants to divorce her quietly, which is option number 2. Like he can divorce her quietly, that was his intention. And then there was a third option, which, people being people, probably happened quite often between that beginning ceremony and ending ceremony of, well, it's time to get married. Like we're not going to be able to wait the 12 months to get married, so we're just going to get married instead. Well, we find in Scripture that was not Joseph's intent. And we think of Joseph as the stepfather of Jesus, a great player in the story, a stand-up guy. But I want you to put yourself in his position, especially men. Like your fiance comes to you and says, I'm pregnant. Kind of the same reaction that her parents probably had, right? Like, you're what? What do you mean you're pregnant? Like, no, that's not okay. That's a big problem. That's a big problem in today's society. In that society, it was a monumental problem. It was a earth-shattering problem. It was the whole family will know about it. And I think about my mother. My mother, like all mothers of all sons, likes to control my life. Even at this age, like I call her and she still tries to control my life, tells me what to do and what not to do. So can you imagine Joseph calling his mother and saying, yeah, we'll call her Catherine. Mary's pregnant. What? What do you mean Mary's pregnant? And then she starts yelling into, I'm using a phone. They didn't have phones. Okay. They're having a conversation. But I can guarantee Joseph's family would not be okay with this. This is not okay in this society. And Joseph, probably like Mary, was told, there's the door. Like, we're done. Like, if you're going to marry her, instead of do what you should do, then we're done. We're not talking to you anymore. You're not part of our family. So again, the second, maybe most popular or known player in the Christmas story has a lot of tension. There's a lot of gray there. And then the third one that we'll talk about, we'll pull on this thread, and it's probably the least recognized thread. And this one's the dragon. Okay, time out, Pastor Craig. There's no dragon in the Christmas story. Like, Pastor Sarah owns a lot of nativity scenes, like a lot, like at least a dozen, and there's not a dragon in any of them, like not one. And I've looked around online before the sermon, couldn't find a dragon in any of them. However, there is another version of the Christmas story that we find in Revelation. So if you go to Revelation 12:4, it says this: the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he may devour her child the moment he was born. So in Revelation, if you read before and after this verse, it looks a lot like the Christmas story, but it's not a Christmas story we talk about because we like the ideal Christmas story. We like the jammy story. We like the story that's got the cute family with all the jammies. But in Revelation, we find another part of the story, which I think is a part of the story we have to talk about. Like if you take back that curtain and look a little more at the supernatural side of this event, I can guarantee the enemy, Satan, whatever name you want to put on it, would not be okay with this event, because this was the event of Jesus coming into our world to reconcile us back to himself. Satan's whole job is to keep us separated, still to this day. So I believe in the supernatural world, he knew what was coming, and that this dragon refers to him trying to step into the Christmas story to prevent it from happening. And you see in the rest of these verses in Revelation that Mary and others protected Jesus in multiple times, and we'll actually talk about one of the prophecies that comes fulfilled in the story of like, this didn't happen. But the dragon, the Leviathan, whatever word you want to put on it, tried to stop the Christmas story. This is just another great example of the gray of the Christmas story. It is majesty, it is joy, it is salvation for us. But there's a lot of warfare going on the other side of it. And it's something we don't talk as Christians about as much as I think we should, that we live in a world that still to this day has a lot of spiritual warfare. And it started in the Christmas story. So we see these players of Mary, Joseph, and the dragon, and they had both sides of good and bad. There was joy, there was celebration, but there was also anger and frustration and tension and even potential supernatural warfare. Like that makes a lot for a Christmas story in the first thread. So look at the second thread, the place. So what was the place that Jesus chose to come into the world? Places are important. If you follow the World Cup like I do, they just had the pairings a week and a half ago. And this is when they take all of the teams that made it into the tournament, they pair them into groups, you play groups, and it's a really big announcement. Like which group you end up in is a big deal. And they want to make a big deal of it, so they did it in Washington, D.C. It got a lot of media. Or we take the release of the iPhone. I got the new orange iPhone, which drives my wife a little bit crazy. She's like, really, you had to pick orange? But, you know, she can be a lot. I can be a lot at times as well. So they do that announcement at Apple's headquarters, this crazy donut building out in San Francisco. Well, they do it there because everybody travels there. So Jesus thinks about the place that he wants to come into the world. Well, it should be a really big place, right? Like logic just says, if you want the news to travel and you want to reach all people, then you should pick a place intentionally. And Jesus clearly wanted to affect all people. This started all the way back in the Old Testament with Abram, that we know as Abraham. It started with, I will bless all nations through you. We find this in Genesis 12:3. It literally says, I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse, and all people on earth. Say all people. All people on earth will be blessed through you. Fast forward to the New Testament, 1 Timothy. In 1 Timothy, it says, who wants all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth? For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself up as a ransom for all people. Okay, so we're back to the thread of the place. We're pulling on this one. And where did he choose? Well, if we find out in the Bible, both Old and New, he had to make a big impact, had to reach all people. In this time, in this place, there's one city. One city controlled about half of the world's population. If you look at this map, everything that's colored is controlled by one city, one political group, really one person. And that one person resides right here in the middle, Rome. So the Roman Empire ran the known world pretty much in Jesus' time when he came into the world. So if he's going to come into the world and save all people and make a splash, it's Rome, right? No, he goes way over here to a backwater on the eastern part of the Mediterranean outside of Bethlehem. And he chooses a backwater. He chooses a very remote part of the world. Well, why does he do this? There's some reasons we'll get into, but again, more gray in the story. All right, the place doesn't make sense. The place should have been Rome. Now, Paul ends up in Rome, eventually doing some of that work, but that's another sermon. Jesus chooses Bethlehem. Okay, well, Bethlehem had some famous places. There was some palaces there. There were some castles there. Herod was the king of that area. We'll get into him in a little bit, but he had a palace actually right outside of Bethlehem. That's a pretty good place, right? We'll go into the palace, the local politics, the local king. Nope. We're not even going to go to that. We're going to go to a cave in the literal shadow of the palace. And that is likely where Jesus was born. He was born in a dark, cold, stinky, wet cave. Okay, again, time out, Pastor Greg. I see this cute little manger scene with the Fisher-Price kids, and it looks dry and warm. And well, that's that. That's us. We like to say it was that. There's a lot of evidence he was actually born in a cave. A manger is not a building. A manger is actually where animals eat. So when you say born in a manger, it's not really accurate. He was laid in a manger after he was born because the only other choice was on the ground in the wet, cold cave. All right, first sidebar. For those of you who don't know me, I always go over here and I talk about something different that's sort of related but not. If he was born in a cave, which I truly believe he is, we were visiting Israel on one of our trips and we went in one of these caves, and I really feel like that's where it happened, and there's a lot of evidence as well. There's some crazy layers involved in that. So the cave that he would have been born in was the same cave that they raised sheep for the annual sacrifice. So this is a cave outside of Bethlehem that the Levites, the priests, would have raised sheep for the annual sacrifice for all of the sins for all of Israel. Had to fall on one animal. It had to be perfect. So they raised lots of sheep to find the perfect one to sacrifice. They lived in those caves. Where did Jesus end up at the end of his life? In a cave. He begins his life in a cave. He ends in a cave, and he is the sacrificial lamb of all sacrificial lambs. So why wouldn't he be born in a cave? All right, he's born in a cave. So now we're going to jump back to where Mary's parents again. Well, let's pick your choice. You could have Mary or Joseph. Be either one of their parents. So they had to travel back to Bethlehem to be registered because they were the house of David. Well, if Joseph is the house of David, then his family is as well. So it's very likely in Bethlehem at that time, there's lots of family. Mary and Joseph had lots of family in that area. Why are they in a cave? Like, other people have got to have some place for them to stay. So think of yourself as a parent again. Knock, knock, knock. I know you kicked me out of the house because of this, but now it's time. Like, can I at least come in and have this baby in this house? And the answer was no. We know that because there was no room for them in the inn, and the inn is actually a word that means more like guest house. It's not actually a hotel that's used differently in the Good Samaritan story, but the word in the Bible would have been like spare room or guest house. So Mary and Joseph, I think, went from house to house to house to all their relatives, and they got the same answer. No. Person non grata. That means you're outside, you're in the cave. And so again, more gray to the story. We think about this little manger scene, and it's bright and it's dry and it's sunny and happy baby getting born, but that's probably not what Joseph and Mary experienced until the shepherds and the angels and everybody came to celebrate. But it would have been a difficult situation for them to be in that area, in that place. So the third thread we can pull on are the politics. So the politics of the day, Rome ruled the world. We talked about before, Rome was in the middle. They were taking over from the Greeks. The Greeks had a political system kind of getting down a rabbit trail here. We won't call this a sidebar, but the Greeks ruled the system with something called Hellenism. Hellenism went four main pillars. They focused on science, entertainment, fitness, and medicine. Sound familiar? I would argue the U.S. is pretty Hellenistic, but the Greeks would go into different areas that they conquered, and they would build education, and they would build a place for medicine, and they would build a place for entertainment. And the idea is that they didn't really have to work very hard to take over the culture because they're like, yeah, great, bring it on. We love better medicine. We love better education. Well, the Romans did that same thing, but they kind of did it with an edge. So you can think about the Greeks were the carrot approach. The Romans were very much the stick approach. Like, you will get an education. You will get in shape. You will do this. The Romans were very forceful, and that was one of the reasons that they did so well taking over the world. So in this political climate, like, why did Jesus choose this? We've been rebelling against God for a long time by the time Jesus is born. You could go really theoretically all the way back to Noah, and it's a continuous story of God saves us, we screw up. God saves us, we screw up. God saves us, we, et cetera, et cetera. Like, God could have come into our world anytime to reconcile, but he chose this place, this set of politics to come into the world. And there's, I think, some reasons for it. That the Romans were, like I said, good at cultural. They were good at assimilation. So, like, if you became a Roman city, you learned the language. You followed the rules. Maybe no time on earth, except maybe now, interestingly, which is also another sermon, but no time in the history of mankind had one language, had one culture permeated the earth. So even though Jerusalem was a really stressful place at the time because they weren't actually following along very well, like most of the other cities that Rome captured would toe the line. Like, they'd learn the language, they'd go to the shows, they'd be happy. Not Jerusalem. It's, in fact, one of the reasons we find Pontius Pilate. We go study history a little bit. Pontius Pilate was a very gifted politician. Why in the world is he put in Israel? Why is he in Jerusalem? Well, he's in Jerusalem because it was a pain in the butt place for Rome. They kept rebelling, and they kept sending more political leaders over there. So Jesus is born into this place that's a ticking time bomb, and that nobody likes the Romans. They're not okay with it. And all the Israelites at the time are looking for somebody else. Like, we hear they're looking for a Messiah. We call Jesus our Messiah, which he is, which means anointed one. But the Israelis and the Jews of the time would have been looking for a different Messiah. They were actually looking for a Messiah that would become Rome. Their vision of a Messiah would have been, hey, we want our own Caesar. We want somebody to kick out the Romans, and we want to take over the world, and we want to be the number one culture. We want to rule the world. But again, Jesus, in flipping things upside down, is born into a political climate that is a little tense, especially in the place he comes into, and something that's pretty difficult. Like, this is not a culture that you would endorse. This isn't a culture that's helpful for others. It is a very black and white culture that is very difficult if you're not following along, which the Israelis did. But there is a reason. Jesus came into this time because of the ability to spread the message. So he wanted to be born in the backwater of Jerusalem for many other reasons we don't have time for, but just the example of the cave and being the sacrifice was very important. But he still had to get his message out. And he got his message out because of Rome. The politics of the time allowed him to spread information. So we'll have our second sidebar. Charlie asked for at least a couple. I'm an engineer by training, by job. I love technical things. I love Roman roads. Roman roads were built 2,000 years ago plus. Many of them, not some of them, but many of them are in existence today. Romans built roads like nobody else built roads. As you drove into our church over here, that is a really bad road, okay? It's a bad road, and it's only like 10 years old. If that was a Roman road, it would be smooth as this floor, and it could be thousands of years old. And this was 2,000 years ago, before concrete, before asphalt, before all of those things. The Romans were able to build these crazy good roads, and they covered their territory. Besides political will, the other things the Romans were really good at was engineering. And they built all of these roads. So Jesus's message, guess what? Because he started in a Roman area that had a bit of tension and had a pretty big leader in it, spread quickly because of the Roman roads. So Jesus chooses to use something as mundane as roads to make sure that his message spreads quickly and efficiently. So love the Roman roads. We haven't really talked about local politics. So this is more global politics. So this is the global politics of Rome and the Roman Empire and trying to control the world. But let's zoom back into, I mentioned Herod before. Herod was the king of Judea, or the area of the Roman Empire. He was not an elected king. He was not an anointed king, meaning he didn't have a line in front of him. He bought his kingship. Herod was, debatably, depending how you do research, the richest man that ever lived. This would be like Steve Jobs and Bezos and Elon Musk all pulled together kind of riches. Like, he ruled everything and had so much money. He was also incredibly paranoid. So he had multiple castles and multiple palaces throughout Israel because he always wanted to get away. He was always nervous about losing his kingship. Like, he spent a lot of money to become king, and he, like Pontius Pilate representing the Roman Empire, really wanted to make sure there wasn't a rebellion, because then maybe Rome would take him out of power. So he was paranoid about a rebellion. He was paranoid about somebody else becoming king. And we find him in the Christmas story as one of the other players, but we put him in the politics because he was really, the political force, the political will locally in Jerusalem. So in Matthew 2:16, we find Herod mentioned here. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. Like, we do read this verse as part of the Christmas story, but we probably don't stop and really absorb it. Like, that's really dark. That's really hard that all of the boys in an entire city had to be killed because one politician was nervous about his power. Like, this is the tension, this is the grayness of the Christmas story. Is a miracle that God came into our world, but it really caused some turbulence and some pain and some suffering, from Mary to Joseph to the politicians to especially, imagine, the mothers that were in that time that had to lose them. I go back to the verse in Revelation, and they're talking about a dragon devouring a son. Well, maybe Herod was the representation of that dragon. Like, again, we don't talk about this part of the story often, but I think it's important to think about, like, the tension that we find in the Christmas story, because it was and is a difficult story on both sides. And I think God did that intentionally. He did that intentionally because he knew in our broken world, we're going to live in tension. Like, we're going to, in this Christmas time, have great joy and great happiness, great excitement, but we're also going to have some stress. Like, maybe it's an estranged child. Maybe it's a relationship that's broken that you don't remember until, guess what? It's Christmas time. And now it's right in the beginning. Are you going to see fill in the blank? And God knew that we would struggle with this type of tension. So whether it was the players in the story or the place in the story or the politics, my challenge for you for the rest of the Christmas season, and maybe in the future, is to see this story from both sides. Like, to see the joy and to celebrate and to be happy about it, but be okay with the hard side of it as well. Like, we don't have to be black and white. God called us to be set apart. He called us to be different. One way you can be different in the Christmas season is to be okay with both. Like, to say, I'm both. I'm for that and that. Like, you don't have to jump into the comments and jump into being all on one side or all on the other side. Be set apart. Be different. The Christmas story's got great examples for us of living in that tension. Living in the gray is what it's going to be like on this side of heaven. Like, it's just the life we get to live, and Christmas is just one more reminder of it, and it's just going to keep happening for the rest of the year. And as we're closing, I want to talk about one more tension or one more gray area, and that's maybe the whole existence of Jesus. Maybe you're in here with family, or somebody invited you this morning, and you're like, yeah, I get the Jesus story, but is it really real? Like, Was Jesus really born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, suffered, died, reconciled us back to God? That's a lot. I've studied Jesus a lot. I've studied the Bible a lot in my life, and I have come to the conclusion that many others have, is either Jesus is real or he's the craziest person that ever lived. And this is one area that's not gray. Like, we just talked through a lot of things that are gray in the world we live in because we're sinners. We're on this side of heaven. But in Jesus, there is either he was real or he is completely false. Jesus is not somebody you can take some of. So I know I just did my whole sermon on the gray and everything else like that, but we're going to end with black and white. And this is a black and white decision. Like, Jesus' expectation of us as followers is that we have a relationship and a commitment with him. Maybe you've heard before, like, a saved person, or I've accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. What that really means is that you say, yes, I believe. Does that mean you don't have doubts? No, of course it doesn't. We all have doubts. We all question our faith. That's part of being human. You're not God. He is. He's black and white. You're gray. You always will be gray. But his expectation of us, if you want to understand which side of that question you're on, his expectation is you take a step towards it. Like, he is easy to find, but he's also easy to ignore. And his expectation is that you take the first step. And then it's crazy how much evidence you see as soon as you take that first step towards it. So in our belief at Citizen Church, we believe that is a decision. That is a decision each of us need to make for ourselves of, like, did we take that step of faith? So in just a minute, I'll close in prayer. And I'm going to ask you that question. Like, is